So this is what some of the northern part of Afghanistan looks like. This is about 16,000 feet where I'm standing. And I got to tell the U.S. Department of Defense right after 9/11 that their Humvees wouldn't work up here very well. And they kind of went into shock. Some of you probably seen, and I know one person said he had seen the movie 12 Strong with General Dostal. Well, this is getting close to that area. You understand now a little bit the way the Afghans react and act to things and some of the problems we have with transportation over there. We did get an Explorers Club flag through Pakistan and Afghanistan and Tajikistan. But we had our problems. First, we were in Peshawar, way down in the south area on the right-hand side for you. Got into Afghanistan without much of a problem, but then when we got up to the northern border of Afghanistan and Tajikistan, we could not cross the river, and they were having problems up there with the tribal people. And so I had to go back and go through Uzbekistan, drive south all the way to Dushanbe, and then from Dushanbe, we followed the black line from the left-hand side all the way down into Kuilao, and then back up to the Chinese border. And it was quite interesting. A lot of no man's land up there, a lot of space. And when we got to Kuilao, we went into the village. We got permission from the Interior Minister and the Minister of Mines and 20 other people. When we got down there, and the village chief told us that doesn't make any difference. That doesn't count down here. So he said, we're not going to give you permission to go out west. And so we went back that night very disappointed. Went down to the bazaar to get some breakfast the next morning, and a fellow came up to us and said, you're foreigners. And I said, yeah, it was myself and my Tajik friend. He says, well, my boss wants to speak to you. So we went over and had tea with this fellow who let us know that he was head of the KGB for that area. And he said he wants to know what we're doing there and what we're going to do. And I said, well, we want to go up to the ruby mines up on the Chinese border. Oh, I don't know if we can do that. So we left very disappointed. The next morning, the same fellow approached us in the bazaar and said, my boss wants to talk to you again. He says, I'm a geologist and we don't see any problem with you taking pictures of mountains. So we went back, and sure enough, he was very nice about it and says, I'm going to let you go. And we said, yeah, but that village chief says we're not going to go and we don't want to be in one of your prisons. So would you call him? He said, sure, I'll give him a call. So he got on the phone. And I don't know, some of us here are old enough to remember Khrushchev. But his face got redder and redder and redder. And finally he slammed that phone down and he says, you two, pointing to me and my friend, go anywhere you want in this country. You just let me know where you want to go. That guy told me I had no power. And sure enough, we got 300 miles out to the east and no place to stay, no restaurants, anything. And we pulled up to this fence, 12-foot high fence. And here's a guard there with an AK-47. And I walked out and handed him my passport. And he goes, Mr. Gary? Yeah. He says, come on in. No food, no bed. Come. So he took us in, fed us, and we stayed the night with him and then went on to the ruby mines. It's a matter of who you know sometimes in this world. Well, on this expedition, we went to the ruby mines of Chigdilik, which are still in existence, and they've been in existence since the 1800s. And then went on north after going through Kabul and Berber's Gardens, etc., and went to the lapis mines. These are up in Sarasang, halfway between Kabul and the Tajikistan border. And this is me in the turban that you see here, flying kunzite in the Peshawar Agency of Pakistan, which you certainly wouldn't want to go today. There's major fighting going on there on all sides. And of course, one time, the Pakistanis had gotten a hold of some of our cruise missiles and they sold them to Iran. So the US had enough power to tell them, you go up and you block that border. If it's an Afghan, okay, but no one else crosses this border. So I wore the burqa. I'm the largest Afghan woman to cross that area. And we think that maybe bin Laden did that once or twice also. In case anybody's taking notes, that's my first and last time in drag. Shortly after that I finished my book, The Gem Hunter. And anyone here who does not have a copy, I've got copies here tonight that you can have later and get more details about my travels. Well, Afghanistan's got a lot of history going back some 2,000, 3,000 years. And if you want to go back to when was the first man thought to be in Afghanistan, we're talking about 100,000 years. So it goes back. You can look at this on the website, so we won't spend a lot of time on it. But I do want to give you a rundown of the Afghan history here in about 25 points. 2000 BC was the first wave of Aryan immigrants. They were using horses, by the way, at that time. In 521 to 485 BC, conquest and the reign of Darius I, who divided the area into Gandhara and Bactria. 328 BC, Alexander the Great invaded the country and kicked out Darius III. 642 AD had many different invaders, so we can't even keep track of them. The Arabs inside invaded Afghanistan and introduced Islam in 642 BC. So when you're looking at the Islam people there today, they've got a long history of being in there, and I don't think they're going to leave soon. So we had Genghis Khan invaded Afghanistan in 1220. Timberlane became the king of Balkh and then went down into Afghanistan. Then Barber was probably one of the most famous ones. There's still gardens that he created in Kabul in existence today. In the 1600s, the British started trading in the Indian region. Ahmad Shah Durrani became king and founder of what is known today as Afghanistan by assassinating the Persian ruler Nader Shah. In 1830, collision between the British and the Soviet Empire, the Great Game began, and it's still going on. 1832 to 42, Afghans destroyed British forces in the Anglo-American War. And keep this in mind because only one Brit got out of Afghanistan after they refused to pay, the Brits didn't pay the Afghan army. So now America wants to leave, so we'll shoot that forward a little bit. Afghans destroyed, then the Durrani line was fixed, and this was a major situation between the Russians and the British to draw a line that both of them agreed to stay on the opposite side of. The problem that it presented is they did okay in the Wakhan area, which they created a northern finger, but when they went south, they put the Durrani line right through the middle of the Pashtun tribe. So half the Pashtuns are in Afghanistan, half the Pashtuns are in Pakistan today, because it was India at the time. But now, for many years, the Afghans have wanted to create a grouping and have all the Pashtuns together. And of course, Pakistan has been fighting that since 1947 when they became a state. Then World War II came up, and like everything else in life, as I told you, the Brits and the Russians were fighting one another, not seriously, but seriously. And then the Germans came in. Well, the Brits and the Russians got together against the Germans, like a bunch of kids. And then the Russians invaded Afghanistan in our time, 1979. The Russia departed after having a hard time with the U.S. and Mujahideen groups in 1989. And then in 2011, after our World Trade Center, we went in and we invaded Afghanistan. And we pretty well destroyed most of the Taliban at the time. And now we didn't do enough about it, and they're back, which I'll get into later. So just capsizing here, invaders for Afghanistan were primarily Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Timur, Babur, the Russians, the British, the Germans, the Soviet Union, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. Then the U.S. came in 2011. Pakistan has been really in there heavy. Taliban again, and then ISIS is there, and Al-Qaeda. This is what it looked back like in Afghanistan in the pinkish area back in 250 BC. Now let me show you some of the leaders so you have an idea of what their faces look like, or the best we could do. Some of them are statues, sadly enough. But this is Darius I. He was the fourth king of the Persian Archaemenid Empire. He ruled the empire at its peak. And then Darius III, because there was a number 2 in there also. But Darius III was the last king of Armenia Empire of Persia from 336 to 330 BC. He's the one that Alexander came in and attacked, and they killed. Actually, his own troops ended up killing him. Alexander overthrew the Persian Empire, carried Macedonian arms to India, and laid the foundation for the Hellenistic world and territorial kingdom. So he actually had Afghans as well as Indians join his army during that time. Then comes Genghis Khan, quite a bit later. His end of his reign, he had the largest continuous empire in history. Oh, it was an amazing feat, going all the way to Europe, basically. And here's a look at a map of his territory that he had conquered by gathering tribes together. And he gave everyone a choice. You either join me or we kill you. It's a very simple program. And then Timur was the next primary leader, historically known as Timur, or Timur the Lame, because he was wounded and had a bad leg. But he led a military campaign across Western, Southern, and Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Southern Russia. Timur's armies were inclusive, multi-ethnic, and were feared throughout Asia. Scholars estimated that his military campaigns caused the death of 17 million people. So he's the one that was famous for stacking heads. And at that time, this would be 1400s, this is what Afghanistan area looked like. Now the great game starts in the 18th century. 3 great civilizations, the Persians from the west, the Russians and Central Asians from the north, and the Indians, British from the east. And this is still going on, and I don't believe it's ended at all. The one leader, Babur, was probably most famous and had probably some of the most peaceful times in many ways. And he was a descendant of the Mongol conqueror Genghis Khan and also the Tajik conqueror Timur. Was a military adventurer, a soldier with distinction, and a poet, and as well as a statesman. So he handled things fairly well to stay in power that long. Next was Ahmad Shah Durrani, founder of Durrani Empire, and is regarded as the founder of the modern state of Afghanistan. And here's what it looked like in 1770 AD. This map I have on my wall. If you'll notice on the far right, halfway down, you'll see the city of Lahore. That's on the eastern side of Pakistan. And if you go straight across to Kandahar, or right by the H in Afghanistan, that's where the Afghan border is now. So this is what the map looked like at that time. So Afghanistan went all the way through what is Pakistan now. The point is that the borders kept changing. And Dost Muhammad Khan was one of the prominent rulers of Afghanistan at the time and had a lot of dealings with the Brits. During this time that the Brits kept attempting to try to take over the territory, and of course, as I mentioned, so did the Russians. They sought extensive control over neighboring Afghanistan and opposed the Russians was their main thrust. But ascending to the throne, Dost Muhammad Khan wouldn't go along with either one of them. He kept them both at arm's length. And then when the British wanted to draw back to the Pakistan area, as I mentioned, he was involved in killing many, many Brits because they had to fight through some of that territory like I was showing you. And then Habibullah came to be president, and he also was killed, like most of them. The king's efforts to institute Western reforms and foreign customs contributed to his overthrow. So they didn't want to become part of the West, and I'm going to mention that again in about 4 times in the next 15 minutes. That's always been a problem with Afghanistan. Then Wazir Akbar Khan, another Pashtu. These other kings were always Pashtus as well. And we have a Pashtu president today in Afghanistan by the name of Gianni. World War II. The official position of Afghanistan was impartiality in World War II. Afghanistan king was on the U.S. and Britain's side as he was rejected by Germany and sent back the German envoys. If he had not decided to be a German ally, Great Britain's empire wouldn't be able to control this territory. Also, they would be compelled to keep their soldiers in India and would have weakened the front of all of Europe. Because Britain was, as you know, had a very much shortage of supplies and people. Zaire Shah came into power. For the first 20 years, Zaire Shah reign were characterized by cautious policies and national consolidation, an expansion of foreign relations and internal development using Afghan funds alone. He pretty well supported himself. But then he had enough money and he traveled to Europe and he saw what the Europeans were doing, and he and his wife came back from Europe and she had a nice Western dress on with a skirt up high, and the mullahs got upset, and that was his downfall, to the point that his cousin then stepped in and told him, after he'd taken another trip to Italy, don't come home or you will be killed. So now we're up to 1972. This is when I got involved, in 72. I had a desire to help the Afghans, and you'll notice in the front with a white shirt and tie is a fellow by the name of Prokopiev. And I worked with Prokopiev from 72 to 79. And the reason of that split is that's when the Russians came in, and the CIA had already told me years before, we were sure that he was KGB, and I wasn't. But we had a lot of funny times together. We'd go to the UN after work, because he was helping me with the Lapis programs. And our joke was that secrets only pass at night after dark. So we could have a scotch and water, and then he'd go to his compound, and I would go back to mine. A couple times we got permission, because I went and told the Russian government that I was leaving. I was fed up. So he'd take me to dinner. If he bought me dinner, he probably could get me to stay a while longer. So we had occasions like that. Another occasion was he came to New York because he wanted to come out to Hawaii and see me. So that told me he was fairly high up in the Russian government at that time. And the Russian government told him, Hawaii is not work, it's pleasure. You can't go. So he visited my office in Detroit. And that's me in the background. I have now since then started putting Clorox on my hair. I did wear a suit, and so did most of the other people you noticed in Afghanistan at the time. At that time, Mohammed Daoud Khan was the president, and he was the cousin of Zaire Shah. And he promoted economic modernization, emancipation of women, which was something new, and arranged marriages were out, and landform and Pashtun nationalism, which Pakistan leader War Ali Bhutto was against. At this time, Pakistan started meddling in the affairs of Afghanistan, and it ended up Daoud was killed in 1978, another leader now. And Cherokee was brought in. Now Cherokee was trained by the Russians, and he was the president of the Revolutionary Council, the Prime Minister of Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, 1978. On September 7, 1978, he was smothered to death. So there's another leader down. And at that same time, it was getting very dangerous. Our ambassador, Adolf Spike Dobbs, was killed and then was kidnapped and then assassinated in the Kabul hotel on February 14, 1979. President Cherokee refused to investigate the murder of Adolf. And next came Abdullah Amin. He had been the head of the Secret Service in Afghanistan, communist, political, and was referred to by the local people as the Butcher. He came to power by disposing of his predecessor, Nur Muhammad Cherokee, and later ordered his death. The Soviet Union, which was dissatisfied with me, and then alleged that he could be an agent for the CIA because he was trained in America. So they had Amin assassinated. And at that time, you can see Amin's picture on the wall. I was back working with them second from the left,
Days on.
and the fellow on the far right, actually, Prokovev arranged to come to my office in Hawaii because even though all the problems were going on, we thought we could keep the whole business going. And they were interested in it. Like any world power that takes over a territory, they want money, they need taxes and dues, so they thought we could keep the business going. And that's me in the blue suit next to the finance minister and the minister of mines. And actually, at that point, by 1976, I was given the exclusives for lapis, the bluestone, for the whole United States. And then
Barack Karmal.
he came in. He was installed by the Russians in 1979, and that's when they invaded. And I was there a month earlier and had the privilege of coming back and telling the CIA that the Russians were coming. And they kind of, yeah, okay. And I didn't hear from them again for 3 months. And then they called me and said, can we come talk to you? I said, sure. So they came over to my apartment. Well, how did you know that? Because you saw our newspapers at that time. Total surprise. And I said, well, I asked Prokovev because I saw all these big guns going down the roads in Kabul. And he says, they're moving in. So then it came up to, well, how did they get here? How did you know when they were coming? And I said, well, there's only one road from Mazar-Sharif down to Kabul. So that was very brilliant. 1979, Soviet invasion, as I said. U.S., Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China started backing the rebels. The CIA worked close with Pakistan's ISI's inter-service intelligence. The war attracted Arab volunteers, including Osama bin Laden. Now at that time, he was our buddy, just like Marcos in the Philippines and Saddam Hussein and everything else. Everything was fine. Sharp young guy. I stood about 3 feet from him one day, and he seemed really nice. He was dressed in his Arab clothes and doing a good job, but you all know what happened later. Of course, they don't mention in most of our newspapers that the U.S. tried to kill him 3 different times, so that kind of ticked him off. Fellow on the left here again, and 2 down, just the other side of the gal there, are the 2 people that I showed you earlier in Afghanistan. They were sent during the Russian raid to my office here in Honolulu to continue to discuss how we could do business and grade stones, etc. And so we had what we called our first symposium on geology, mineralogy, and gemology of Afghanistan and the Hindu Kush. Since then, we've had 7 other symposiums held in either Pakistan or Tucson, Arizona. This is one we held in Pakistan. We had about 60 Afghans. Each of the commanders selected some of their better people to come across the border and learn how to explore for stones, how to dig them out of the ground, how to start marking them. And we were there to help them out. We actually had experts go over. Dr. Larry Snee, who's standing up in the center, was one of the U.S. Geological Survey Team's division headquarters people. And we had, and Andreas Werk was a German specialist in mineral specimens. And at that time, of course, we got noted by President Zia al-Haq, who later was killed in a coup too. At that time, he was president of Pakistan. Just a couple years later, this is a picture of Ahmad Shah Massoud, the leader of the North. Next to him is General Bismillah, and then Engineer Shak, who wrote the front of my book, the forward in my book. And Engineer Shak was the head of the television stations in Kabul before the war and again after the war. Now you might recognize that fellow in the middle. He is now the shared partner with Ghani, the president of Afghanistan. He's supposed to be the executive president. And next to him is John Mohammed. This would be the one on the left. He was in charge of all supplies coming from Pakistan into Afghanistan. And he was the one that basically had to smuggle us across the border because Pakistanis didn't want us helping out the Afghans, especially Ahmad Shah Massoud, because he was a straight leader, didn't want any of this guff going on. And Hekmatyar, who I'll mention later, was one of his deadly enemies. And next to Dr. Abdullah is Tajuddin, and that's Massoud's father-in-law, who I stayed many months at their house at different times. And of course, couldn't go around just totally under the cover. So this article here, connected with this one, is where I was accused of being a spy with a Pakistan paper. So false news. Then Dr. Jibullah was the last president of Afghanistan from the Soviet-backed regime, and that's when the Soviet troops departed in May 1989. And Massoud let him stay in the UN compound totally free. And then the Taliban, when they invaded after that, they also butchered Najibullah in Kabul. Rabbani was president of Afghanistan just before the Taliban came in and conquered it. And he was a key player for almost 15 years in Afghanistan and was the leader of the Jamia-e-Islami. And here he is in the presidential palace when we visit him. And the fellow on the far left is Mirwais Khan, who was here with me last time. Massoud was defense minister at that time when Rabbani was president, and he was a powerful military commander during the resistance against the Soviet occupation between 1979 and 1989. From 1992, he led the government's military wing as he defended Kabul from rival militias attacking the city. After 1996, he was the only remaining opposition commander against the totalitarian Taliban regime, which he fought against until his assassination on September 9th, 2001. And it's pretty well been proven that Pakistan ISI, which is their intelligence organization, set up the camera bomb and gave it to two Arabs to go and assassinate Massoud. But this guy, in my mind, I spent a lot of time with him. He walked on water. He was the most honest, decent person that I've ever met. He didn't care if you had money, no money, who you were, where you were from. Every time I went to see him, he'd have 15 to 50 people in his office waiting to talk to him about their personal problems or whatever, and he just spent time with everybody. And then when it comes to drugs, which I'll mention later, if his soldiers smoked a cigarette, he'd put him in jail. So there was no fooling around with this guy. And at that time, I had finished my book, Gemstones of Afghanistan, which in the back gives all the coordinates of all the mines and all the minerals of Afghanistan. And also, I was able to take him satellite maps, which he was very happy with. This particular meeting was in Tajikistan. So he used to fly into Afghanistan from Tajikistan, and some of his helicopters, which I'll show you for a minute. But about that time, I was able to travel back through the Khyber Pass, even though it was forbidden. I could get permission from Pakistan people to do it. And there's a quick look at the Khyber Pass, which is famous, going from Afghanistan to Pakistan. But the Shillong Tunnel, I thought, was more dangerous and higher, and also the Sheba Pass up in the north. Dr. Lally, who's the short fellow in this photo, told me that he had been the Minister of Mines for 15 years. And I said, Dr. Lally, with all those rulers, that's impossible. He said, well, Gary, sometimes I took 3 to 5 years off as a vacation. But this is where they gave me permission to be a consultant for them. And this fellow here, I spent a lot of time with, Amarullah Saleh. He was the equivalent of our head of our CIA in Afghanistan for about 5 years. And I got a picture of when he was younger and one more recently. But his office last week was just blowing up. He was wounded, and my prediction in the end is going to be that if we back out, the Taliban are going to go into Afghanistan full blown, and it's going to be a bloodbath, and it's already starting to happen. And I'll get more onto that later. This is Mullah Omar. You probably haven't seen his picture because he pretty well went out. He was the head of the Taliban until he passed away. This is the character that was in the movie 12 Strong, Drillstrom. And then my only occasion of meeting him was he was trying to take my truck away from me. And he finally let me have it. But we had to have tea and argue over it because he said he needed it. And I said, well, I need it too. But at that time, I knew Rabbani and Massoud and Kabul, so he knew he was in trouble if he really took it away. And this is a really bad character who was the one who did all the bombing attacks into Kabul in the time when the tribal people were having troubles, and they claim he's killed over 5 or 50,000 civilians in Kabul just with his bombings. So, not a good guy. In my opinion, he'd sell his mother for any power at all. And he's still there, and he's going to be coming up in the very near future. Then we have the guy that you all know, started off friendly with the United States, and then got crosshairs, and then became, in our opinion, a really bad guy who was recently shot not too long ago under the Obama administration. But what I can't understand, go back up here. We thought we were winning Pakistan over. These are the T-shirts that were being passed around Pakistan with bin Laden's picture saying, "Great Mujahid." I didn't see any of our president's pictures over there, except one time they were hanging George Bush in effigy in the market. So this guy, you don't hear much about. He, to me, was the Casey Stengel of the Taliban or Al Qaeda, and bin Laden was just the guy out front like the Mickey Mantle. Ayman al-Zawahiri is a sharp doctor from Egypt. He's been in this Al Qaeda mode for many, many years, and he's leading it today, and you don't hear a thing about going after him. And I'm pretty sure he's in Pakistan, right near where bin Laden was, and being highly protected. And this is one, just a note, not too long ago, this was January, where he was carrying out and ordering attacks in other parts of the world. So that's one of our biggest problems today, is worrying about if we leave Afghanistan and it becomes a base for Al Qaeda and the Taliban, we're going to have real problems in the world, because they are not hiding out anymore. They're right up front and in our face. And Karzai became the president of Afghanistan for almost 10 years, and he went out with a vote, and they're supposed to have another election in 2 more months, but I have doubts whether that'll be carried through or not, because the U.S. has to finance it, and we're trying to pull out. Ghani is the current president, sharing it with Dr. Abdullah. You see here, as I mentioned earlier, he was the one back in Panjshir Valley with me. Another picture. This fellow I don't know much about, but he's also running for president, and he's had a lot of international workings with international groups inside of Afghanistan and out, and I've heard he's a pretty sharp guy. But here again, he's a Pashtun, not a Tajik. Dr. Abdullah, strangely enough, his mother was Pashtun and his father was Tajik, so he's sort of acceptable, but they still consider him to be a Tajik. Tajiks, by the way, are of a Turkish descent, so they're totally different than the Pashtuns, or the Hazaras, for instance, are the Mongolian descent. You see, they still have the slanted eyes, and they're mostly backed by Iran, that group. So as far as the economic future, no matter what happens, they're counting on their mineral mining. They claim, this is the USGS claim, that they have $1 trillion or more in valuable minerals, and this goes from rare earths, the gold, the coal, the copper, and they're all in the back of my book. I've got the Russian data in the U.S., and the data that's up on the website from USGS is the data that I gathered back in the 70s. Of course, the trading, including agricultural products, because they have wonderful grapes and fruits in that area as far as wheat, and gemstones and marble. Those are their main talk. I didn't put talk on here as another one. The main thing why the U.S. government brought the Taliban to the United States back in '92 was they took them to California. They want to build a pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan, through Pakistan to India. And this is what they see as a very valuable tool. And of course that keeps away from China too, so there's some politics that come in from the backside on that. Of course they also have natural gas, which is pumped into Tajikistan and on up to Russia. This is a list of the minerals. They've got a wide range. However, the risk-reward ratio of mining any of these at this point in time is like for good. also have, thanks to the World Bank financing it and USGS providing most of the services, they now have hyperspectral imagery, which most of the US doesn't even have. And they can go out and are now onto their computers and tell you the chemistry of all the different areas in Afghanistan. For instance, what I wanted to do, but they haven't let anybody use it yet. We tried several years to use some of this data because emeralds are beryllium and they're made green by chrome. So all we'd have to do is get a scan on the computer of the beryllium areas in Afghanistan, overlay the chrome areas, and 90% chance you would have emeralds there, for instance. That's just one item. Of course, this works for many other things too. But they have not allowed anybody to use this data, even though they've spent millions on coming up with it. So now we come to September 11th, 2001, and that sort of ticked the U.S. off. Even though they pulled a lot of troops out, we've been up to 100,000 because we wanted to go to Iraq. The U.S. was supported initially by the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and later by a coalition of over 40 countries, including all NATO members. The war's public aims were to dismantle Al-Qaeda and to deny it a safe base of operations in Afghanistan by removing the Taliban from power. And we pretty well did it. But then we went away and went to Iraq and forgot about it. And Pakistan and the Arab countries started financing it, giving them weapons and guns. And also, more important than anything else, they could go in and out of Pakistan anytime they wanted. And they were not harmed or hurt. They were actually fed and had hospitals, and Pakistan was taken care of. And at this time, of course, my business crashed because I was in the gemstone business. And I got called into Washington 10 days later because all my shows were canceled. And I put on TV to talk about Afghanistan and what was going on. Since then, I've been talking and doing a lot of work with USAID and World Bank to try to initiate SARS with their gem and mineral industry. This was the World Bank. And they asked me to quickly summarize and then give details of why the industry was not working. And so I talked to this group of people, and this is what my short statement was. The gem industry is a short, disorganized industry with government personnel calling miners smugglers and the miners calling the government employees thieves. Because the government wanted up to 50% duties. They weren't going to do anything for the local people. They wouldn't even give them, and they still don't today, have licenses to mine, so they can't say, we own this mine. It doesn't work. And then the government, of course, wanting 50% as far as the miners were concerned, some of them have been mining for 50 years. And most of those people are poor, don't speak English, live in tents next to their hole, and have never been to Kabul and are never going to go to Kabul. So it's not working. Now I'll jump to another topic. Strangely enough, since the U.S. really got involved in 9/11, the poppy production has just gone up drastically. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but it's hard to pin it down. But the Taliban are now taxing the drug industry, and they claim that 366,500 households grow poppies. 90% of the world's production of poppies are grown in Afghanistan. 80% of the poppies are refined into heroin with chemicals smuggled from Pakistan and China. Taliban receives an estimated $470 million from taxes on poppies. Most drugs are smuggled to Tajikistan and China. And my guess is that that's maybe why the U.S. isn't quite so involved, because they're drugging up other people than non-American citizens, so less concerned because of that. On the bottom part there is where the drug areas are, most of the poppies are growing. However, I noted that they left Badakhshan, which is way up in the right-hand corner, white. Well, I've been in those poppy fields up there, and they look like this, and they're growing well. But farmers don't make much money because the drug lords now have gotten to the point they want to grow the poppy. So they give the farmers some money and say, go away, come back in 3 or 4 months. Problem is, they've now got money, but when they come back, their growing season's over, and they can't grow their wheat. So the farmers aren't real happy with this, and they're not getting much money. So if anybody wants to go explore in Afghanistan, I've gone through these 21 things with diarrhea, shipborder disease, what they call anthrax, which was a real problem for about a year, falling off a mountain with a horse, toenails lost, blisters, landmines, poison ivy, poison fly bites, scorpions and centipedes right in your bed, hepatitis, rocket small arm fire, Sunni versus Shia riots, bandits, house arrest, tunnel cave-ins, being accused of being a spy, working with the Taliban, road we had wear burqas. I said the toilets were the major problem. The last time I was there for a month in the field, we had no toilets for a month, and I got so tired of that. And of course, language problems. They have 20 different languages over there. Some of the items are marked, though, as you see, both sides of the road is a mine. And also, if you see red rocks, that means there's landmines in the area. Doesn't tell you where. And the scorpions. If you see a scorpion, there's always two around. I think they mate and stay together. About as dangerous as Masood's helicopters that we rode around in. They're pretty patched up. The gas tank is inside in the center. And on the last trip I had out of there, the fellow was smoking a cigarette leaning against the gas tank. I told my buddy, don't ask for the maintenance records. You're very disappointed. These are poison fly bites, which you can get leishmaniasis from. Now, a couple people, or three people, that I actually admire and are heavy into my library and helped me a lot with my exploration was Marco Polo. And he actually went into these same areas that I did most of my work in, and it's hard on a map, but right in the center, it actually says ruby mines in one part, written back in the 1200s. Another one was Ole Olesen, who talked about the Devil's Passes getting in and out of Afghanistan and Tajikistan, and he had drawn this map. The other fellow that I don't have a picture of, sadly enough, I've looked for, is Captain John Woods. He was a British spy back in the 1800s. And what he did, he was so good that he didn't want to make any notes, because if they caught him, they'd see his notes. So he had the Islam beads. Every step, he'd count a bead. And then he'd make a note, 850,000. And then at night, he'd go and he'd draw when he could send his messages off of the distances between. So he did a lot of mapping. And also, as you can see on your right-hand side, there's a Soviet map in 1880. So it was these maps that allowed me to go find many of the mines. And we pulled gems out like you see here. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, kunzite, tourmaline, aquamarine, lapis. So we've got some fantastic gems there. This is in the center of a lapis mine. See the lapis in the veins here in calcite. And this is Karun Valley. This is one of the areas where the Russians really gave up. They tried to fly their helicopters down. You're starting at 7,000 feet. Up at the top is 15,000. And if you go to the back of the valley, you hit 20,000. They'd have to turn around and come back. Well, the Afghans would get up at 18,000 feet and shoot down on the helicopters. So that didn't work. So then the Russians went in and said, we're going to just blow them off the face of the earth. So they started dropping bombs, and many of the bomb hits, the Russians found emeralds, or the Afghans found emeralds, so they ended up financing the Afghans on that one. But this is pretty country versus what you see on TV, because most of the war situations are in the more desert areas. This is the village of Hinge. This is what it first looked like when I started going there early, climbing up the mountain. That was blasting, by the way, in the back end of the valley. And then the tunnels became like this. But currently they've got some major equipment. Even though they do not have mining rights, the Minister of Mines and the other people don't go up there. Because at one time the Minister of Mines was explaining to the Afghans that this country of Afghanistan owns these mines. And they got up and said, look, you're up here at our invitation, and we've given you a good dinner, we'll get you back safely, but if you ever come again, we'll kill you. And we've got a video done by BBC, as she mentioned, of that mining area. So what I had to do to be able to travel all over this area, of course, is to win the hearts and minds of the people. So as I mentioned, we did seminars for 7 years. I've also taught gemology classes in Kabul. This was a whole team that put together for USA, and we went to every emerald mine, every ruby mine, took people's names, took a latitude, longitude, altitude, so we could find those mines and give them licenses. And that was going to be the program. But the Afghan government decided they didn't want to really do it. So we're really disappointed on that. We also, for local and international Rotary clubs, we took school books over to the schools, and this is a path in the north. That's about a 200-mile distance. We went back and forth to go to the different schools and different villages. And you know, they don't have any desks. They're crowded in. A few of them have desks nowadays, but they didn't back then. And here's Kay in the back on her first and last trip to Afghanistan. And I always pass out balloons to the kids. That's one thing that's easy to carry. Good. The other thing we did for Lions clubs, both here and in the mainland, we passed out eyeglasses, because nobody's got eyeglasses. And you know, after 40 years old, you're having trouble seeing. So, boy, they really appreciated that when we were doing that. There's a lot of different languages are spoken in Afghanistan, as you see in this map. And I'm going to go on here. The United States
is patently unwilling to
commit the forces necessary to oppose the military reality in Afghanistan. Likely would take 500,000 troops or more to go back in there at this point in time and take over Afghanistan. And we don't have the will to do it, the desire to do it, and what would we get out of it if we did? So it's a real quagmire. Okay, here's our errors. Not winning the hearts and minds of the Afghans. The lack of support by neighbors in Afghanistan, such as Pakistan, Russia, Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and China. Way overpaid for goods and services. If you want to rent a house in Kabul today, it's $10,000 to $15,000 a month. This is ridiculous. Now, there's no change in the Taliban attitude since we toppled them. They still want to take over Afghanistan. They don't want any foreigners in there, and they want to run the country under the Islam rules.
Let's look at the possible outcomes if the U.S. were to pull out under a peace agreement within a short period of time. Most likely, the Taliban would continue to fight. Pakistan would probably join them with supplies and manpower. The Arabs would continue to support Al-Qaeda. Iran may support the Hazaras. Would the Northern Alliance be reconvened as it was under Massoud with the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and the Hazaras? No one seems to know. Other questions would be, will the Taliban change policies on women's rights? Will they let the women go to school or have the ability to work or just walk around town without their husbands? Will Taliban be involved in the world jihad is another serious question. I know with the current negotiations, they're trying to stop the Taliban from working with any of the ISIS or Al-Qaeda people. So let's just change the topic here, and you'll wonder why I'm so willing to jump into the middle of this and have been going many summers to Afghanistan. So what's my philosophy? I say that life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty well preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "What a ride!" Thank you all for coming today and listening to my lecture, but there's a reason behind it. I would like to sell you the first timeshare lots in Afghanistan.
Thank you.